Welcome, Dr. James Beckett, Sports Card Insights here, talking about a topic that I don't think I was thinking about talking about. Winterizing your collection. If you've read the news or kept up to date, last week in Texas was a terrible week. I shouldn't even be chuckling about it, but everybody is safe here. We've weathered the storm, and I know many have had worse or had worse situations, so we're okay, but a very bad week and a lot of damage. Just curious if any of my collecting brothers and sisters had damage. So I'm going to talk about winterizing your collection, starting with how this impacted me, things I did do, things I perhaps should have done, and share that with you. But thanks sponsors, Topps Panini and Upper Deck, Heritage Auctions, Huggins & Scott Auctions, Mike Stadium Sports Card, Burbank Sports Cards, ComC.com, and Beckett Media, Beckett Grading, Beckett Authentication. Obviously, Beckett Media is here in town. I know they were affected. I've talked to some of them. Panini, I haven't talked directly to them, but they're also here. Of course, Brian Gray with Leaf is here. Rich Klein is here in the ComC Plano office. So a lot of hobby here. I think everybody's okay healthy-wise, but some economic damage and a lot of frustration. How did I handle it? You start with a great wife. When you have a partner to go through something that's tough, you want to have a great partner, and I certainly do. But one of the things that's great about her is that she has a great attitude. And you've heard the expression that really the only thing you can control is your attitude. I think that's Viktor Frankl. You can only control your own attitude. You certainly can't control your wife's attitude. You can barely control your own attitude sometimes. Another thing I learned, I have these gloves, and like my wife, they're great looking, but unlike my wife, they are not effective. So great looking gloves are not what you want when it gets extra cold. They were not helpful like my wife was super helpful. Another mistake I made is you need to be absolutely certain where the water cutoff is before a blanket of snow covers it. If you watch the Super Bowl, Tracy Morgan's commercial, Rocket Mortgage, that being certain is quite a bit different than being pretty sure. I was pretty sure where the water cutoff was for our house, and pretty sure meant scrambling around and brushing off snow until we found it, and we've had some burst pipes. So what's worse, to lose your power or lose your water? It was actually probably worse to lose your power, because after you lose your power, then your water freezes. But then you think, wait a minute, we had a generator. We had a nice big generator that's all set up. We maintain it. It goes off every week, whether we need it or not, just to know that it's working and being maintained properly. It's natural gas, so it can't freeze. The generator went out. And there's a lot of finger pointing of why that happened. But when the generator went out, then when we had no power, we started getting really cold. We've found now 9 frozen burst pipes. Again, I'm not trying to set a record here, but again, this is Sports Card Insights. I'm happy to report that none of the burst pipes were near my cards. Some of that was intentional. Some of that is just the blessing of ignorance is bliss, perhaps. So our water's back on, but the city of Dallas is saying it's on, but it might be bad. Perhaps you should boil to make sure if you're not going to drink it, but we have some drinking water. It caused me to think about some other issues. Grading. I've got a grading order that I'm going to pick up next week from BGS. I'm happy about that. How much protection of winterizing would grading and slabbing cards be? Insurance claims, if you have a loss about your collection, it's usually theft or fire or a flood, water damage. The theft, if cards are graded, they're going to take the graded ones. Seemingly, those would be the more valuable ones. You'd think if it's a fire, the graded cards could melt. Again, it depends on the heat more than the fire, and that's a loss. And water, you would think that if your cards are graded, they would be safe from flood or water damage, but that really depends on the airtightness of the slab and the pressure it's put under. I can't make any promises there. If you have an insurance claim for a theft, fire, or flood, any of those, whether the cards are graded or not, you're liable to have some problems. I was thinking, can cards freeze? Could there be freeze damage, like a freezer burn? I haven't put cards in the freezer, but I guess it would depend on the water content of the card. If there's no water content in the card, it couldn't really just be inert, and so it wouldn't be damaged. Yeah, I've learned from previous lessons, I can tell you about, I had an experience where if the cards are on the ground, in boxes on the ground, the osmosis sucks the water up into the cards. I didn't do that. I've learned, and I learned because back 40 years ago, in fact, exactly 40 years ago, I think, we bought a football card collection. Wayne and Gervis and I did, and we got it from a guy that had a storage unit, and he was intending to keep it for a really long time because they were just going to go up in value. what happened. There was a flood or something at the public storage thing, and these otherwise mint cards that were in vending boxes and had been sorted into players, mostly football, mostly mid-late 70s. So there's Walter Payton's in there, which wasn't a big deal then, but we got those cards out, and you're looking at these bricks of cards, some of which were stuck together. You couldn't even get them apart. And the ones that were just influenced by the water still had some warping. And it caused me to think, PSA is the one that does qualifiers. So if you had a PSA 10 or 9 or an 8 with parenthesis WD for water damage, that's probably not as bad as off-centering, but it's painful to see cards that have had water damage. So what other lessons did I learn? It's good to know a plumber or know somebody that knows a plumber or has clout with a plumber. If there would be a list of plumbers who are also collectors of cards, I would love to have them on speed dial. But we got through it. We got answers from some people when we inquired that you are 101st on the waiting list. But we did get a plumber in here for the last few days and really helped. It's just a skill I don't have. So what happens if a plumber shows up without a mask? It's these days of COVID. What are you going to say? You say, hey, buddy, go get your mask? Or are you going to say, thank you for coming. Please come right in. We've got a burst pipe. Second question, when a plumber comes in, do you tell them when they're seeing sports memorabilia, do you tell them that you're a sports card collector? Opted to not talk about that because I wanted to fix the leaks first. So fix the leaks. And then after you fix the leaks, we can talk about my hobby and all that stuff. I'm looking for a plumber first and a friend second, but these people who've showed up here and helped, really appreciate that. It brings to mind that actually, when I'm doing this podcast, I'm realizing that I probably do have an opportunity for some part-time assistance on the podcast and some of the other things I'm doing with cards. So if you're in the Dallas area, some of the work would be virtual. I'm sure it's less than an hour a day. But if somebody wanted to get involved and help me out, I'm open to that now that the leaks have been fixed. It's not the coldest I've ever been. The coldest I've ever been was at the Great Wall of China back 20 years ago in the wind and the cold. But this was the coldest I've ever been indoors. I'd never thought about winterizing my collection. I'm now fully aware of not just the possibility of frozen burst pipes, but the probability of it. I probably should have thought about that it's something that could happen and now has happened. It's very bad. To my knowledge, any cards that have been water damaged will always be downgraded. I don't think you can remediate the water damage. If it's an otherwise mint card and it gets water damage, I think it knocks a 10 down to an 8 or a 7 or a 6. And that's not criminal, but it's painful. Lastly, it's just great to have a hobby. When you're stuck, you're sheltered in place, and then you're sheltered in place with no power and no water. Again, having a hobby that you can enjoy, even in the dark to some degree, is a great blessing. Be careful. You need to winterize even if you live in the South. The people in the North probably understand these things, but the way houses are constructed here, we have an older home and we now realize that winterizing, there's an additional layer of winterizing that's necessary when you have lowest temperatures in history for our area. Thanks for the concern. I'm going to keep cranking out these podcasts. Most of the podcast activity is off devices that are battery powered. We've had rolling blackouts, which now have ended. So we do have power now. So thanks for your concern. Enjoy the hobby. Don't take anything for granted. Be sure to winterize regardless of where you live, unless you live in the equator. So thanks, everybody. Be back again tomorrow with another episode.
The man in the house of cards. The man in the house of cards. The man in the house of cards is